seat. Have the chief's chair.
Yes, thank you.
Right. Children, good morning. Right.
I saw your name.
We have a very, very special visitor this morning to the school. Arguably one of the most special visitors we've ever had to the school. Tommy's a friend of the school, also a very good friend of mine, as is Joyce. So Tommy lives in Ireland, but it's not where he was originally from. He's going to tell you a bit of a story about his life. And there's some sad stuff in the story, as you'd expect. So Tommy is a Holocaust survivor. And the Holocaust is a period of our history in humanities history, which was a very dark period. And you're already starting to work about World War II, right, in this year group. So we have a real privilege. Usually it's very difficult to have a Holocaust survivor speaking to Year 6 children. But Tommy's doing us a special favour, and he has recently produced this wonderful book, which talks about the Holocaust in Tommy's life. It's called Tommy, which is the one that you see behind you on the screen. There's a photograph of Tommy as a young boy. And he explains bits about his life to you guys. Tommy's a special guest particularly because the more you learn as you grow older in the senior school, you will learn specifically about World War II, and you will learn in your studies and early studies about genocide and Holocaust survivors. And you learn about that period of history when the Nazis were particularly unkind and mean to the Jewish people. So even years to come, you'll always remember this time where you met as a real privilege to hear Tommy speak. So Tommy, thank you for coming and for agreeing to speak to the children. I'll leave it to you. Thank you.
I introduce myself first. First of all, I'm very grateful for Mark inviting me to Solihull. This is my, I think, fourth time I'm here.
Third time, yeah, third film.
And I spoke a couple of times here and showed a couple of my films that I've made, documentary films as well. My name is Tomi Reichental. I was born in Slovakia. I'm living in Ireland for the past 58 years. And I'm a Holocaust survivor and I'm Jewish. Now for the past 14 years, I began to speak about Holocaust. You still didn't learn about the Holocaust, but it was a very traumatic period for the Jewish people because in Europe they had a conference which was the conference in Germany, and in this conference they decided that they want to get rid of the Jews. It was a time that the Jewish people afterwards were being arrested and sent to camps, concentration camps. And these concentration camps were horrific places. Many of the Jewish people perished there. And I lost in the Holocaust 35 members of my family. They were my aunts, my uncles, cousins that I knew very well. They came to the village where we lived in Slovakia for the annual holiday. I used to know them very well. And one day we said goodbye to them, and we never saw them again. But I ended up in a concentration camp as well. It was called the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in northern Germany. It was a horrific place. I always describe it hell on earth, because that's what it was. People were very skinny. They were starving, and we were starving as well. And we didn't starve for a day or a week. We starved for months. And starvation is not the same as being hungry. When you starve, you're constantly hungry, and eventually the body eats itself from inside because the food that you take in, it's not sufficient to sustain you. Just to give an example, we ate per day the equivalent of 6 water crackers. I'm sure you know them. You get them in the supermarket. They just square little thing. So for a day of food, that was the equivalent that we add every day. And it's not sufficient to sustain it. So the body eats itself from inside till you get very, very skinny, you become like a skeleton, and finally you pass away. So the life in these places was horrific. And I experienced and saw a lot of dead people that perished in the starvation. I used to see these skeletons walking around. They sometimes fell down, never to get up again. They died because they were so weak. So I saw actually people die in front of my eyes. And because of this traumatic experience that I went through, then eventually we were very lucky. We survived this very hard time. And when we came home back to Slovakia, I never spoke about it. I never spoke to anybody about it because the memory was so bad. I didn't speak about it actually for 55 years. But eventually I realized that I'm one of the last survivors of this period. And I knew that in Ireland, when I met young people, they knew very little about the Holocaust. And I decided that I have to speak up. And I slowly started to write an article in magazine to tell the people my story. And then, of course, the media came on to me, and eventually I decided to speak in the school to young people, mainly into a secondary school, children for 15 and up to 16, 17-year-old. And for the past 14 years, I'm speaking in school every week, maybe once or twice, sometimes even 3 times. And I'm telling my story so that the people don't forget the Holocaust. Because the Holocaust is a history that we have to remember in order that it doesn't happen again. And I realized that because I lost so many members of my family, that I owe it to the victims, that they shouldn't be forgotten. And that's why I'm speaking in these schools. And of course, over time, it became very known that I'm speaking, and schools invite me. And in fact, for the 14 years that I'm speaking, I spoke well over 120,000 students directly, like yourself. I spoke to them and told them my story. And therefore, they said to their parents that they heard me speaking, and they told their friend that they heard me speaking. So really, if I spoke to 120,000 students, I really spoke to many hundreds of thousands about the Holocaust. I also made 3 documentary films. The first one was about my autobiography, about my life, which was shown all over the country, in Ireland, in cinemas and on television. The second film was that I wanted to meet one of the jailers that was in the concentration camp when we were there. She's today 96-year-old. And I wanted to meet her, to make a reconciliation with this woman, so that she has an opportunity to say that she is very sorry what happened during that time. But unfortunately, in the end, she didn't want to meet me, so I never met her. And then the third film that I made, which was only released last November, was called Condemned to Remember. In other words, I was condemned to remember. And basically the film is about the problem today. I'm sure that you see it on television, and I'm maybe reading in the newspaper about refugees. The refugees that we see on the television, and they escaping persecution, murder and rape, and they are trying to find a sanction in Europe. And unfortunately, the people don't want them. And that reminds me, when I was a little boy, when the Jewish people wanted to escape Europe from the Nazism, from the persecution, nobody wanted the Jews either. And then the tragedy of the Holocaust happened. In the Holocaust, 6 million Jewish people lost their life. So you can just realize the scale of the crime that was committed. And when I see this repeat of history, I call it a repeat of history, that now in 2017-18, I see the refugees that are trying to find a refuge in Europe. Nobody wants them. For me, this is a very important message that we should help these people, because when the Jewish people looked for help, nobody helped them, and this tragedy then happened. And we don't want that history is repeating itself. And I'm saying that the history is repeating itself, not that we have concentration camps. But I always say, the Holocaust did not start with gas chambers and murder. It started with whisper, with dabbing on walls, and later persecution, and finally murder. So it's not that I'm saying it can happen again, but we have to stop this whispering before it spread, and again some tragedy could happen. So it's very important, in my opinion, that the education, it's very important, that the young people have to learn that what happened in the past, and that it doesn't happen again. So if you see somebody's bullying somebody else, which happened many times in school, especially in like England, Ireland, we are a multinational society. So you have people, many foreigners, you have people different religion, and of course when children are mixed, sometimes there is created somebody does like somebody else because he is a foreigner, or he is a different religion, or he or she is a different color skin, and the bullying starts. And when you see such a thing, don't become a bystander. Say that's wrong. Report it to the authority, to your teacher, to police, whoever, that this boy or this family or whoever it is racist. It is what it is. And make sure that that person doesn't get on doing this. We have to stop it before it begins to spread. So I always say, don't become a bystander, but get involved and say it's wrong. And that's the message when I'm speaking to young people all over Ireland, not only in Ireland. I traveled all over the place. I was many times in the States, of course, England. I spoke in Germany, in Slovakia, in South Africa. I travel all over and speak to young people to explain That's the message. Don't become a bystander. Get involved. Say it's wrong. It's a very important message, because that's how things get out of hand, and later on people can stop it and tragedies can happen. So that was basically that I wanted to tell you about my work. It is something that I feel is very important. I feel that education is very important, and therefore I speak to young people, which is very important. But I also speak to society, like historic societies, and even in the industry. I've invited now to go to some of the big companies, and they bring their employees and employers to listen to my story. So I'm very busy sometimes. I'm booked months and years in advance. We were just lately in the school, and they said that they had to wait for me for 4 years. Can you imagine? Because I'm booked so much, and that's one of the opportunities as well, and that I come to Solihull as well, speaking to you. But I also want to, as Mark mentioned, I wrote a book, and I call the book It's for Adults, because there are horrific things in the book that wouldn't be suitable for children. So we brought out another book, which is basically my own book, but written for children, which is called Tomi. My name is Tomi, and it's a story that introduces you to the Holocaust, what the Holocaust was about, and what I went through, and it's described, but it's for children from sort of 9-year-old to about 13-year-old, 14-year-old. I'm going to read you a chapter or half a chapter, and then I will explain to you what actually the chapter is saying, because it's not only what you're reading, there is a story behind it when I wrote it. So I'm picking up, it's a chapter called Mazel Tov. Mazel Tov in Hebrew is good luck, and you will see what the reason is. So I read you the story and listen to it carefully, and then I will go through it and I will explain to you what that means. In spite of the fear, cold and hunger, they were part of daily life in Belgium. Tomi and his friend continued to play together, and the older girl and woman in their hut tried their best to create some fun for the little ones in the middle of all the misery. Judith, who was 15 and the older sister of Tomi's friend, Naomi, was one of the people who made life in the camp bearable. She spent hours playing with the small children, organizing games, teaching them Hebrew songs, and making little figures from wool, then hiding them for the children to find. She was the one who made sure that Mickey's birthday on the 18th of December was celebrated. It was a very special birthday. In Jewish tradition, as soon as a boy turns 13, he is considered adult. If the family had been at home in Merashice, there would have been a huge celebration with the whole family, all the Jewish friends. They would have had a ceremony in the synagogue where Mickey would have read from the Torah, and then a party at home in their house with lovely food and music. Everyone would have dressed up in their best clothes, and there would have been singing and dancing and game and stories. It was not quite like that in Belsen. In fact, Mickey had expected nothing at all for his birthday. But Judith had other plans. When the family came in from the freezing roll call, there was a smell of roasting potatoes and something that looked like a tiny cake. It's a day of celebration, Judith said. She had managed to get hold of a few little potatoes which were roasting on the stove. The cake was 3 slices of bread piled on top of each other, covered in margarine and sprinkled with sugar. There was even a single candle on top. When the cake and potatoes had been divided up into tiny morsels so that everyone got a share, everyone wished Mickey Mazal Tov. Then the whole had joy in singing. At the end of the day, Annika gathered the boys to her, kissed them good night, and said, as she always said, "Don't worry, we will be all right." And somehow, after a day when they had managed to celebrate in spite of the horrors of the camp, they believed her. For Christmas, Judith collected a few branches from a fir tree and stuck them together so they looked like a Christmas tree. This she decorated with strips of colored paper. When the guard came around, she and the children sang Silent Night. Judith even had a little gift for the guard. And on that day, for once, there was very little shouting and no beating. Things were about as good as they got in Belsen on Christmas Day, despite the fact that the weather was now freezing and there was snow and ice on the ground where the roll calls were made. So that story, of course, is continuing. And I want to just describe you what it meant. Now, first of all, Mazel Tov means good luck, and the story is called Mazel Tov because my brother had bar mitzvah. He was 13 years old. Now, the whole description that the Jewish people insisted and wanted to celebrate all their traditional things that they did when they were free. We also, the adults, they wanted to celebrate this event. How little it was, as I described it, if we were home, it would have been a huge celebration. Many people would be invited and there would be a lot of food and things. But in the concentration camp, we didn't have all these things. In the concentration camp, we starved. We had very little food to eat. And there I described that a woman, she made a little cake. She just wanted to make sure that my brother's birthday was celebrated. And she made a cake from 4 slices of bread. Now, in the concentration camp, bread was the currency because people were starving. And with bread, you could buy anything. If you gave bread to somebody, there were people that were desperate for having a cigarette. So with bread, you could buy a cigarette. There was a way how to get it in. And so with bread, people would, were able to buy, whether it was cigarette, or sometimes somebody was sick and they needed some medication. They could even buy medication with a slice of bread. And this woman, she made a cake from 4 slices of bread. It doesn't, it means, I don't know how to take it, but when you starve 4 slices of bread, it's a difference between surviving and having something to eat. So this woman sacrificed a couple of meals for making the little cake for my brother to celebrate his bar mitzvah. So the meaning of it, it's very, very deep. And then I'm describing the Christmas. And we were supervised in the camp by what they were called the SS women. They were the guards. And these women, they were very, very cruel. When people misbehaved themselves, they would beat them up. And we heard this beating, or saw this beating every day. And they didn't speak nicely to anybody. They were always shouting, and this wife said there, on this day of Christmas, we didn't even hear the shouting. It was a little bit different to any other day. We made a tree for this guard that come to check, because every morning after the roll call, the hut would be checked that it's clean, and if somebody didn't do their bed or something wasn't right, they were beaten up for it. These women were very cruel. And here we decided to welcome this woman. And as I say, they were very cruel. So it wasn't out of love that we invited her in and sang Silent Night, because these women were very cruel. But we just wanted sort of a see and that they can show some humanity towards us, that as children, that they behave themselves a little bit human towards us. So Judith, our leader sort of that organized, did the tree, and we were learning to sing Silent Night. So when she came in, she was very surprised that we were all standing in sort of a half circle and singing the song, and it touched her, because it was the first time that we saw that woman, when she saw what was happening around her. There was a child beside her, and she put her hand on the head of the child. And it was the first time that we saw that one of these women actually has a human feeling, that she is a human, because otherwise we thought they were rotten, they were very bad people. And here she put a hand on the head of a child. So the whole event touched her. But as I mentioned, it wasn't because we thought that this woman was good for us. It was, we wanted to get a little bit of sympathy. It was like a little bribe to make her feel good. So when she comes after day of Christmas and things, that she's not shouting, that she's not beating and doing things to us that were not very pleasant. So it was false, but at the same time we got the response that we wanted to see, that she was human, that it did touch her because she put the hand on the child. So that's what I wanted to tell you, and read from the book. But there are, of course, many stories like this in the book that have a lot of background. It's not only what you see, what you read, but you have to tell what it meant at the time for us. Now, we probably have a little more time for question and answer. So, if you have any question about me or about what the Holocaust, what the concentration camp was about, I would be delighted to answer, because there are not many of us, you know. Today, the Holocaust survivors, they're all in their 80s and 90s, and in the next 10 years, 15 years, none of us will be left. So it's a great opportunity for you to speak to a Holocaust survivor. So if you have any question, please ask. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, Thomas, I was going to say, just before I do, Tommy, thank you so much. That's wonderful to hear all those, your life story. It's difficult for you to say, I know, but we really appreciate it. Children, just before I'm going to give you a small opportunity to speak to the people next to you, to have a little bit of think about what Tommy said. Tommy, just let's try to remember, Tommy was the equivalent of J2, and he was taken away from his home in Slovakia and put in a concentration camp in Germany, many miles away from his family. And the only reason he was put in there by the Nazis is because he was Jewish. And you might not know this, but if you were of Romani, or if you were Romanian or Gypsy origins, you were also put in concentration camps. If you were homosexual, you were put in concentration camps. Or if you were disabled, you were put in concentration camps. So the Nazis had extraordinary level of nastiness. And Tommy's only crime in their eyes was because he was a Jewish boy. And very, very sadly, of the 6 million, 1.5 million children didn't survive. One of the wonderful bits of news is Mickey, who's Tommy's, that would be 1944, Tommy, right? Yeah. Mickey is alive and well and living in Israel, Tommy's older brother, so he also survived, unlike 35 members of Tommy's family who very sadly did not survive. So we'll let chat with the person next to you, and then we've got some time for some questions. Right, guys. Okay. Tommy, shall I pick some out? Who would like to ask Tommy some questions?
When the war was going on, did you hear from like outside about what was actually going on, or did you hear nothing?
It's a really good question. When the war was going on, were you aware of what was going on outside the camp? Really good question, Sam.
No, yeah, but no, I didn't know. I didn't know anything. Even before the war, where the whole persecution started, I was at the time 6-year-old. And at the time, being 6-year-old, it's not like today 6-year-old. We were very innocent. Today, a 6-year-old, they have internet, computers, you see the television, news and newspaper and everything. So a 6-year-old, they not only know what is happening in England, they know what is happening all over the world. When I was 6-year-old, I didn't know anything what was beyond the village. And at the time when the persecution began, my parents never told me what was going on, for the simple reason because they didn't want to frighten me. So I didn't know anything, even what was happening, as I say, outside, beyond the village. And I didn't know that we were hated because we were Jewish. And I discovered the hatred in a very sudden way, because as Jews, we had to wear a yellow star. So when I went to school, the yellow star said, I'm Jewish. And then when some children stood on a corner of a house or somewhere corner of a street, and they saw me, they would start to shout at me, you dirty Jew, you smelly Jew, go to Palestine, and all kind of insult. And I didn't know why, because I never harmed anybody. So it was a difficult thing for me, and later on they became more aggressive, and they would throw a stone after me, they would try to spit at me, they would try to catch me and beat me up. So it was a very frightening time. Of course, when I was in the camp, I was 9-year-old, and in the camp, we never knew what was happening outside. So it was a difficult time. When we were liberated in the camp, we were liberated by the British Army, I was only a skeleton. I was very skinny, very weak, and I had to go to hospital, and I always sort of think about it. If we were not liberated at the time that we were, who knows how much longer I would have survived. So I was very lucky that I survived. Yeah.
So how did you end up living after? What did you do after?
What did you do after, Tommy, once you post-liberation and post getting back to
After the liberation, as I mentioned from the last question, I was in hospital a couple of weeks to recuperate because I was very weak. But then they kept us for a while in quarantine because in the camp there was a very dangerous disease, typhoid, and it is contagious disease. So they kept us in quarantine for about 2 months. They didn't want to release us so that we don't spread the disease among the civilian population outside. After 2 months, buses came from Czechoslovakia, and they picked us up, and we went back home, which was my home, Slovakia. We were very lucky that our house was left intact and was not destroyed or robbed, because usually when the Jewish people were taken away, their neighbors, they would ransack the place and steal everything. In our case, it didn't happen, so thank God we had our house, and I went back to Czechoslovakia, and actually I have to mention that from 1942 till the end of the war, 4 years, till 1945, I missed all the school, my basic education. When I came out from the concentration camp, I was 10-year-old. I couldn't read, I couldn't write, I couldn't do any mathematics, and therefore, when I started to go to school, I was put in class with younger than you. I put in classes with 6 to 7-year-old because I had to start from scratch. They had to teach me how to write and read. So when children after the school went home and they were out, went playing and everything, I didn't. I had to stay in the house and try to learn, because it was very embarrassing for me as a 10-year-old sitting with a child of 7-year-old. At that age, 1 year makes a huge difference. So it took me 2 years till I caught up with my own age group. And thankfully, as I grew up, I was smart enough, clever enough to eventually to go to a college and finally qualified as a diploma engineer. And in my adult life, I had my own business and I didn't do badly. So I was very lucky, but my childhood was quite difficult because I had these problems.
This little girl here.
And
has
as
had
Dominic said, Tommy's been very modest here because Tommy's a very bright man, as you can tell, very successful, and apart from the fact he can explain himself really well to you guys. Tommy, how many languages do you speak? 5?
6.
6 languages Tommy speaks. So he lost you. So Tommy, if he sat the school for Solihull Junior School, he would absolutely have got a place at the school. Tommy.
You know,
Absolutely.
I have to mention it to you. When I was here, I don't know if it was last time or before, I think it was the first time when I was in the school. We went all over the place. We were being guided and explained what the school is about, and we saw everything, which was just, you have a school that not many children have opportunity to go and learn everything is so well organized. And then I was brought to this section of the school, and when I went into the class, and there were children sitting there, and I asked, how old are these children? And they told me 9-year-old, and I burst crying. And you know, they asked me, what the hell you broke down? Why you crying? Because I realized at that age, I had no opportunity to go to school. And I thought to myself, if I would have got the education that you are getting here, who knows what I would have been today. Mine, I have 3 doctorates, but they're not doctorate that I went to university, they're honorary doctorate. So I always tell students that studying to doctorate, I said, you have to do it like I did it. I never went to university and I got a doctorate because of the work that I do. But I think if I had the opportunity being in school like here, and that's what hit me when I saw these kids, and I said, how lucky you are to get this education and what you can achieve. And that's what went through my mind and made me so emotional.
Thank you, Tommy. Anna, well done for waiting patiently for Carol.
When you were taken to the concentration camp, did you know where you were going?
That's a great question. When you were taken to the concentration camp, did you know where you were going?
No, of course not. None of us knew where we are going. But while you ask this question, also I have to tell you that we were very lucky. And why we were very lucky? At the time of the Holocaust, Jewish people were being killed, and they were being killed by guards. And from Slovakia, when the transport were being taken away, before the transport was taken away, we had to stand for a selection. The selection was made by a high-ranking officer, German officer, and he would take family by family, and he would say the young man and woman go to one side, and the children, mother, and the old people to the other side, which meant that this officer played a god. He decided who is going to live and who is going to die. So the people that went to the right side, they were young men and women, they had chance to survive because they were being taken and to walk in camp, they walked and they had a chance to survive. But the people on the left side, they were selected for the gas chamber. And when our family came to this selection, we were 13 at the time arrested, 7 people went to the right side, and 6 of us, which was my grandmother, my aunt, one of my cousins, my mother, my brother, and myself, to the left. So the adult among us knew what that meant, but we didn't know where we were going at the time, but we knew that we were destined for the gas chamber. So you can imagine the adult among us, how anxious they became. The atmosphere was very bad. We were put in cattle cart and taken away. We didn't know where we were going. But as it happened, at the time, it was in November 1944, the German army was losing the war and they were retreating. While they were retreating, they were taking the prisoners with as well. And the transport that were going to the gas chamber went to Auschwitz. That was the extermination camp. And we were going to the direction of Auschwitz. But when the German army was retreating, they blew up the gas chamber. They destroyed them because they didn't want to leave them there so that the Russian soldiers don't find them there. And we were on the way to go to these gas chambers. But because they were blown up on the 7th of November, we were in the train at the time. We were diverted to go to different camps, to Bergen-Belsen. And that's why I'm here. If I was arrested, we were arrested a week before, we would have gone straight to Auschwitz, and we wouldn't have survived. We would have been gassed in the gas chamber. But as it happened, we were lucky, or that God was looking after us. We just were the first transport from Slovakia with mother and children and old people that didn't go to the gas chamber, but we ended up in Bergen-Belsen, which was not an extermination camp. It was a detention camp. And so, thankfully, I was saved.
Guys, we're pretty much running out of time because you need a bit of a break before you're going to go back in. And Tommy's got lots of other stuff that's happening today. Tommy's going to borrow your book for a second.
Okay.
Thank you. So when I said to you guys at the beginning that Tommy's a very special man, now you have some sense of just how special Tommy is. And you can read all about Tommy's life. And obviously there's lots of difficult, challenging stuff in here, but you're of the age going to senior school, you'll learn more about this stuff in any case. And you have got the benefit of having met Tommy in person to know that he smiles a lot, he laughs a lot, he has children, he has a wonderful life with Joyce, he does lots of wonderful things, but he is hugely passionate about you guys understanding where the stuff started, about being unkind and being nasty, and not checking that balance and keeping it stopped so it doesn't get worse. So next week, you're going to have a tour of the Anne Frank exhibition, which will be in the George Hill building. And then the day after that, the J4s will do a full workshop on switching off prejudice with the Anne Frank Trust. So you will learn, particularly these days, online, Tommy, a lot of the prejudice and discrimination, as you know. So you'll do a whole day's workshop, which will teach us how it is we can learn about the things that we need to understand, so that we live in a society where we value each other and respect each other, regardless of our religion, or race, or physical ability, or persuasion, just to accept all those things. And Tommy is a wonderful example of why it's hugely important that we do that. So can you give Tommy a round of applause?
Just a moment, before you do, did they read the Anne Frank story?
No, probably not yet. Usually say, anyone read Anne Frank's story? Have you read Anne Frank's story?
Okay.
Oh, Francesca, what about you?
Yeah.
Anne Frank's stepsister, Eva, is coming in about an hour's time. She's going to be here tonight.
Yeah, but what I wanted to mention that Anne Frank died in Bergen-Belsen. And the only connection I have with Anne Frank, of course, we wouldn't have known who Anne Frank was and what beautiful stories she brought and all that. But at the time, after the liberation, we played in the hut where Anne Frank lived. Of course, Anne Frank didn't survive the liberation. She passed away before. I wouldn't have known about Anne Frank but I played in the place where she lived during the stay in Bergen-Belsen. She was in Bergen-Belsen, as you know.
And her sister Margot as well.
Yes, and I.
So, yeah, who has read Anne Frank story? It's great. If you're inclined to read, wonderful. So you know a lot already. So Tommy's story, if you like, is the kind of stuff that happened next, because Anne Frank was first of all reported to Auschwitz, that Tommy mentioned, and then at the time when the Russian army were advancing from the east and pushing the Germans back towards Germany, she was moved to Belsen with her sister, and sadly she did not survive, and Tommy just about did. Tommy, it's our good fortune to have happened as everybody else, so thank you so much. Give me a round of applause, please, guys.